All right, so hello and welcome to video debrief for some videos that Nathan sent me of training in the past couple of days. I want to share this with everybody. This is a new format, I guess, that I'm trying out to see how it goes. It allows everybody to kind of watch on their own terms, on their own time, and then they can provide me with their feedback, comments, questions, whatever it is, through this platform. So let's jump right into it and take a look at a couple of the videos that Nathan sent. So here's the first one. What I'm going to focus on for this debrief is tacking. So let's talk a little bit about what we're trying to achieve in the tack and some ways that we can maybe try to improve our tacks and create more consistency in our tack, because really what we're looking for is ultimately speed. We don't want to lose speed through the tack. Is that realistic? No. It's not really realistic. So then beyond that, we want to be consistent in our approach and in the way that we're trying to re-accelerate the boat. So ideally, we're working for minimal loss of speed through the tack, and obviously then re-accelerating after the tack as quickly as possible to limit that time that we're down speed. So just before we take a look at the video, let's jump over to some analytics data. So this is 29er training from the other day in Montreal with Eric and Hunter, as well as Thomas and Will. For this example, we're going to use Eric and Hunter. So if we look at our upwind track here, and on the right side we have some data about boat speed. So you'll notice that if the black is the fastest speed and the gray is the slowest speed, then we can notice that as we enter our tack, we're going quite quickly, but following the tack, we hit a zone of gray, which is obviously that slow pace after the tack as we sort of build back up to full speed. We can also see that represented in the graph on the side here, where each time we have a tack indicated by this vertical line, we have a dip in speed. So if we're averaging around 6.97 knots, with sometimes greater speed, sometimes less speed as we're sailing upwind, then we see this significant drop in speed after the tack. So from a maximum speed of, let's say, coming into the tack 7.5 knots, all the way down to 3 knots before building back up to 7.4, 5, 6, and then almost 8 knots at some point on that next tack. The other thing I notice here is that even before you actually perform the maneuver, the boat has already started to slow down. So from a speed of 7.6 knots down to 6.9 knots at the point that the bow is crossing the wind. So another thing that we're talking about a lot these days is trying to limit our setup time when it comes to entering the tack and then settling in as quickly as we can on the new side. So we want to basically go from full sailing in the groove going fast to full sailing in the groove going fast on the new side. So how do we shorten that amount of time? What happens when we're going into our tack? Let's say at this point our coach blows the whistle, and that triggers something in our mind that says, oh, okay, it's time to tack. And then we start to maybe subconsciously head up a little bit, lean in a little bit, start to sort ourselves out to get ready for the tack. So what I ask you guys to try to do is to go directly from full sailing, fully extended, trapezing or hiking, if that's the case, right into the tack with minimal setup time. So maybe we can limit that time. So that's almost 10 seconds of setup time coming into this tack. So we need to bring that time down to, let's say, 4 seconds, 3 seconds. A second is actually a very long time when we're talking in sailing terms. So we really need to almost immediately go into that tack. We also notice that from entering the tack and then that dip in speed, that it takes a very long time to get back up to speed. So from the slowest point of our tack at 3.1 knots, it takes 8 seconds for us to reaccelerate to full speed. Obviously, as we're sailing along, the wind speed is varying, so we do have variation in our speed, but it's limited within a range somewhere around our average and our maximum speed there, as you see here. So each time we have a tack, we notice a similar trend. So that slowing before the tack, the major drop in speed as we go through the wind, and then the slow increase back to full speed after the tack. That's true here, same thing here, same thing here, and so on and so on. So that's just giving us a little bit of context about what we're going to be looking at when we jump back to our video. So let's just slow down this video a little bit. We're going to put it on mute so we can watch and we can look for potential areas of improvement. Oh, it's sped up. My mistake. There we go. So here we are entering the tack. First thing I notice, both sailors crossing the boat roughly at the same time. That's great. We want to be synchronized when we're crossing. Maybe we can have the crew crossing a little bit more quickly than the skipper would. That allows the skipper to stay on the old side for longer, steering, watching the ticklers, and watching the bow move through the wind. So keep in mind, both skipper and crew, we always want to keep our heads up and looking forward. I see a lot of times people are looking down at their feet at where they're placing their foot and as they're stepping through the boat. That comes with time on the water, time in the boat, and we become comfortable. It becomes second nature to us, and then we no longer have to be looking down and kind of assessing where are we going to step, where are we going to sit, visual distances, spatial distances between one side of the boat and the other. So in this case, I would say Nathan could slow down just slightly, but with that said, he's also the first person sitting down on the new side. And again, when it comes to limiting the amount of setup time that we're doing in our tack, we want to have the skipper standing for the least amount of time possible. Why is that? It's because when you're standing up, you're obviously less stable, and you're not sailing the boat as fast as you could. So from sitting on one side to sitting on the new side with our foot under the hiking strap, obviously, and ready to sail. So as soon as I reach the new side and I sit down, I'm already looking forward, looking at the new ticklers on the new side, and looking forward at where I'm going. So very important to keep the head up as we go through the tack. As the crew, what am I looking for? Well, I'm looking to duck under the boom, and as soon as I'm crossing the boat, I'm looking up on the new side at where the puck is going to be, right? So I can grab the puck, I can pivot, and then I can drop myself out onto the wire. So again, for Kofi here, I'd like to see his head up, which I think he does a pretty good job of, and looking for the new puck. So again, here we can see Nathan standing up. We would like to have him sitting down as soon as possible here, as the boat drops down onto the new tack. So there he goes, sitting down. All right, the next thing I notice here is that Kofi is spending a bit of time on the new side, getting himself sorted out. He's looking at where the bail is to be able to clip the bail to the harness, rather than committing to the wire early. So one big conversation we've been having, especially with our 49er sailing that we've been doing, is committing to the wire. So when we're talking about re-accelerating the boat quickly after the tack, we need that pump, we need that weight on the wire, driving the boat forward, and that's the number one priority. So rather than clipping on right away and worrying about being secure, we want to right away get our weight out on the wire, get the boat re-accelerated, number one priority, and then after that we can worry about clipping and settling into a comfortable position on the wire. So here we notice an extended period of time, and what's happening while he's working on that? Well, the boat is heeling. And here we can see him, he is standing on the side of the boat. So where is his weight in this position here? Well, his weight is centered in this middle area here on the boat. So, whoops. Rather than having the weight leveraged outboard, if he were on the wire, fully extended, straight arming, and that would bring the boat down flat more quickly and allow you to re-accelerate more quickly. So how we do that mechanically speaking with the main sheet and the puck and the pivot and everything, well, those are details that we can go over in person when we're all together. But essentially what it comes down to is the aggressive moving out of the boat and onto the wire quickly. So it takes him a little bit too long here, I think. And still we can see, and then eventually, boom, he gets out onto the wire. Great position, by the way, with the shoulders dropped and the legs extended. But we can see that the boat is quite heeled here. So we want to make sure that, again, early commitment to the wire with the boat flat all the way through the tack. If it's light wind, do we want a little bit of a roll in our tack? Yeah, sure, we do. But we don't want so much roll that that leeward side of the wing is going in the water, right? And as the breeze increases, we're going to increase the rate of turn in our tack, and we're going to speed up the whole process because it's important we get to the new side and we don't allow the boat to heel. So again, judging by the conditions here, I would say it's sort of moderate conditions, and this maybe could justify a little bit of a roll. But this is definitely a loss of speed based on the amount of heel that's happening here. One thing we can think about is, the boat under the water and the surface area that is touching the bottom of the boat. So when we're perfectly flat, we have a symmetrical flow through the water where the water is flowing under the boat and coming out evenly on both sides. This creates balance under the water and it makes the boat move more quickly. When we're heeled, the portion of the boat that's touching the water is asymmetric, and therefore that creates imbalance, which we then have to correct with either body weight or trim, or most often with rudder movement. And of course, rudder movement is slow too, so we want to avoid moving the rudder as much as possible. One thing that I think about when I'm sailing upwind is keeping sort of a light grip on the tiller so that I can sense whether the boat is balanced at any time or not. Now, obviously, if I need to steer for a wave or to put myself on the proper course, then I'm going to have to do that. But when I can, I allow the boat to kind of sail itself, if you want, or do its own thing, rather than sort of forcing it to, because every time I'm forcing it, I'm having to move the rudder, and then I'm creating a disturbance under the water. So let's move on, getting a little bit off topic here. So again, I would say it takes a little bit too long to get settled in. I do like Nathan's body position here though, both feet under the hiking strap. And now here we've reached a point of being flat and fully settled in. So I would say at this point, are we back up to full speed? Probably close, getting there, but not 100%. Here I would like to see the feet a little bit closer together just because it creates that much more leverage. This isn't terrible, but again, from a technique point of view, I think that the crew could gain that little bit extra by trapping with the legs together, knees together, core engaged, and then pressing as much as possible into the boat. It's hard to tell here whether he's on his tippy toes or not. But I would say, always making sure that we're trapping off the balls of our feet, and that way we're able to extend onto our tippy toes like a ballerina when a puff comes, and that gives us that extra little bit, so 1-2 inches of extra leverage. So the other thing I notice here, based on the wind speed, is that you're having to dump the main out quite a bit. So as soon as we're at a moment where we can no longer keep the mainsail in 100% of the time and use body weight to keep the boat flat, we need to start adding vang. So I'm judging vang based on the video. I wasn't there, obviously, on this day, but it looks pretty flat to me. Which means that we can afford a tighter leech tension, and that way when we're easing out the main, the leech tension is maintained. So in this situation here, every time he's easing out the main, we're changing the mainsail profile because the leech doesn't have tension in it. So we need to use the vang to set our leech tension the way we want, and that way the leech tension stays consistent and the boom is just moving in and out from the center line while the sail shape stays the same. So again, just to quantify that, if we were going to if we were going to be sailing in more chop than this, and again, it's hard for me to tell what the chop is like, but it doesn't look like there's too much. I would probably go tighter on the leech tension, maybe a little tighter on the jib leech, and that way we're just going to be driving forward that much better. Now, if it was wavy, then we would want a little bit looser leech tension, especially if we're hitting bad waves, which we talk about a lot. Then what's happening is, with less vang, when we're easing the main, as we see here, the leech is opening up because there isn't leech tension being held by the vang, and then it's allowing us to create a bit of twist to re-accelerate the boat, right? Apparent wind, twist, and the relationship between these two things, and that allows us to get moving more quickly. And then once we're back up to speed, well, we're able to retrim and or put some vang back on at that point. So again, vang after main sheet and jib sheet, trim, vang is number one, as we know. So we need to be proactive about it, making sure that we're playing it on and off as we're sailing the upwind. So in the lulls coming off, and then in the puffs coming on. So this is something that Kofi can work on because it's his job to get that done. So it requires bending at the knees, right? And coming in, grabbing the vang, and then we can tighten the vang as we press off away from the boat using our knees. We have a lot more power in our legs than we do in our arms, so we want to use our legs with a straight arm as we extend out with the vang sheet in our hand, and that way we can trim more easily. I also notice a little bit of flutter in the leech of the mainsail, so that might be a little bit of leech line, or again it could be vang related based on the fact that there's not enough. So here we see quite a significant ease, and we can see based on the profile of the mainsail that the leech is quite open there. And the boat hasn't really slowed down because there hasn't been waves or something that you have to deal with. So this is simply an overpowered situation where the mainsail can't be kept in with the amount of body weight that we have. Again, the more we dump the main out, we have to be careful about thinking about the slot. So the more that the wind increases, the more air is trying to be forced through that slot, right? When it's light, less wind, less is trying to be forced through the slot. So the more it increases, that's why we're easing the jib out a lot of the time when it gets windier, when it gets really on the high end. But we also have to think about leech tension on the jib and how it relates to the slot. So as the wind increases, we need to make sure that we're allowing enough gap between the back of the mainsail and the jib that enough air can pass through, because we want to be accelerating the air over the backside of the mainsail. So this requires obviously changing our pins or moving our track outboard, both to try to achieve leech tension. So when we're doing that, we want to make one change at a time. We don't want to make multiple changes at once. Why? Because it's hard to quantify and figure out, did this work? Did it not work? Should I go back to the previous setting? So what we want to do is change one thing, sail a little bit, see how it goes, and then if we feel, okay, now it's time to make a further change, then we can make another change and assess how that change feels. So everything is steps, and it's a process to coming to what's the right answer as far as how we're going to set up the sail. My number one thing would be to go from top hole to middle, and then I can think about moving the pins outboard on the track. But I tend to avoid moving the pins on the track if I can early, because it kills my pointing. So I would like to avoid that if possible. Keep in mind, of course, that jib sheet also affects leech tension. So while we're moving the pins, that may also be, on the clewboard pins, that may also be changing the amount of sheet tension that I'm going to need to achieve the same amount of leech tension in the jib. So obviously if I'm at the top hole and I trim on, it's pulling down, it's closing that leech a lot. But if I do the same thing with all right, small glitch there, sorry about that. What I was saying was essentially if we move our pin to the middle hole, then we can afford to trim a little bit tighter, which still would create the same amount of leech tension. Or if we want an open leech, then we could trim to the same point as we would at the top hole, and we would then have a looser leech, but the bottom of the sail would remain more or less the same. So let's continue the video. There's that leech flutter going again. Jib looks quite eased. Good body position here. Very happy, especially Nathan. I like this. My only comment on Kofi's side, I love the body position. I would say that he could potentially be more toggled or more extended based on the fact that he's throwing a lot of main sheet. So obviously we want maximum body weight. We don't want to be giving up power that we could use. So power that is useful to us should be taken advantage of. So again, there he's bringing the shoulders up a little bit, and we don't want to underestimate. How much does my arm weigh? How much does my head weigh? My shoulders when I'm extending out and back and dropping my head or bringing my arms up like this so I can sheet from here. Well, this is a lot of weight in the arms and the shoulders that becomes outboard at that point. So every time you bend the back, which you shouldn't be doing anyway, or you move inboard, think about the relationship between leverage and how much of your weight is going in when you just move your head or move your shoulders or move your arm inboard. So that's it from that video. Great video. Thank you very much to whoever it was that shot that. Let's move on to another video here. I think what we have is a little bit of downwind sailing, but let's jump to our other upwind video. Sorry, 1 second. Let's go to slow speed. There we go. Half speed. So again, I'm looking at the wave state and it looks small to moderate. Again, I'm seeing quite a bit of open leeches here. So I think it's time probably to go to a flatter sail plan. So how do we flatten our sail plan? Cunningham, jib Cunningham, and like we already discussed, moving our pins down and outboard here on the main. And yes, it's true that we can reduce the amount of vang when it gets up into the extreme conditions, which opens the top of the sail, allowing some air to spill off. But this is not our first go-to when it comes to depowering. So less wind, deeper, more powerful sail plan, and then as it starts to increase, we want to flatten off or blade off our sails so that they're very flat, they're not catching as much wind as they were before, and we're allowing some air to spill off. So don't go to a looser vang unless the conditions specifically call for it. So it's vang, 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 on, and then there comes a point where it's okay, now it's Cunningham on as well, jib Cunningham on, flattening the sails, and then at some point over 20 knots, we're thinking about starting to actually back off the vang. And the exception to that rule would be, again, chop. So if we're talking chop, then maybe we would go to easing the vang a little bit earlier than we would if it was flat. So assessing wind and also assessing wave state, because these two things go hand in hand when it comes to sail trim. I like Kofi's little toggle there. That was nice, wrapping the hand. So again, crossing through the tack, we can see Kofi is leading before Nathan. Nathan does a pretty good job of sitting down. The other thing I notice here, if we back up just a second, is as Nathan is bearing off here, he's got the main sheet in his hand, and then at this point here, he dumps the main sheet out. So that part is very important as far as we enter the tack, we want the main sheet all the way in. Why? Because it helps the bow of the boat come up through the wind. So it's really important as a skipper that we squeeze it in and the boat comes through the wind. But then as we hit the new side almost immediately, and we may be standing or we may have just barely sat down, now it's time to start to dump out the main as our crew gets sorted out. And also dumping the main allows the boat to turn down onto its course in the same way that pulling it in allows us to head up into the wind. So if we're struggling to force the boat down onto its proper course, based on the fact that we're a little bit slow through our tack or we haven't put enough body weight outboard to force the bow down, then we can also use the main sheet as part of that process. Of course, remembering that we have to then retrim it and or play it as the crew is getting sorted out and going out on the wire. And again, same comment as before, so right away out committing to the wire and then worrying about clipping in and settling in after that. So let's just look how that process goes. So here he is on the wire, already clipped before extending out. Good body position, although toggled a little bit too high, I would say, in this case. Again, the mainsail is out, so we're giving up power that we could use to our advantage were we to just toggle down and hike a little bit more. I can see Nathan here is at 90-degree angle, and he could be giving it a little bit more as well. So as the skipper, I'm thinking right after the tack, in that time that my crew is getting sorted out, that it's my job to hike my ass off and make sure that the boat is staying flat to the best of my ability until the crew can get into position. So does every tack go perfectly well? No, it doesn't. In an ideal world, it would. But sometimes things happen and we need to be ready to react. So we need to be there to come to the rescue of the other person. So if I'm the skipper and I'm watching my crew moving through the boat and all of a sudden they're having an issue, they're trying to sort something out, they're caught or whatever it is, then I need to be prepared to come to their rescue at that point. So I think that's it as far as a few things to do in the tack. I hope that you are easing your jib sheet before entering the tack and then throwing it across to the other side so you can pick it up again and then retrimming. Again, widening the groove by easing the jib is very important on the new side because we don't know exactly what the optimal angle is, so we want to try to find some general heading and then sort of dial it in from there. So we start with a wide groove, and then as we get up to speed and we find the perfect angle, we trim back on. Just like we would in our acceleration, right? The crew, as they're extending out for the acceleration, they're bringing the jib in to about 90%. Same thing with the main sheet, 90%. As we get up to speed, then we're click, 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 bringing in that last 10% as we reach full speed. Because if we go to 100% right away, then the boat has more trouble establishing flow and getting up to speed. So we need to let it breathe for those few moments while the boat establishes flow and then starts to accelerate. And the same thing is true after the tack. So really we could think about our tack in the same way as we think about our acceleration. So it's about establishment of flow and then acceleration over the foils and over the sail of the breeze as we go faster. Let's jump out of here and go to our downwind video. Let's just watch this one. Why not? So sailing pretty high, looks like. Oh. Sailing high, riding the leeward chine. Does this make sense? Yeah, I think it does. You don't want to be too high, obviously, but this looks like a bit possibly puffy conditions. So we want to make sure that if we hit a lull, we don't have the boat coming over on top of us. So a safer position is to ride that leeward chine, although this seems a bit extreme, I would say. Good mainsail setup. Looks like the vang is off, but not too much that the leech is very open. So we do want a little leech tension going downwind to sort of drive off the leech. And you can sort of feel that in the main sheet, that little bit of like flick that you get over waves and stuff. This looks pretty good though. Again, Kofi, I would say pointing the front foot a little bit more and keeping the feet together would allow you to have a little bit more leverage. Good job, Nathan, hiking, I can see. My last question on the downwind would be, how often are you checking in with your jib trim? So I would say on the downwind, depending on the conditions, I'm probably checking the jib between 5 and 10 times, maybe, on a leg. So what I'm doing is I'm looking at the ticklers, right, and I'm just setting my sail to the point of sail that I'm on. So making sure that I'm always at the optimal trim. Of course, as we go more quickly and the boat, the apparent wind moves forward ahead of the boat, we can afford to trim on the jib more. But when we slow down, it's really important that the jib gets eased out to account for that apparent wind angle that's now further aft. And this can change quickly. And when we're sailing upwind, the angle between our boat wind angle, let's see the course that we're moving on, versus the apparent wind angle is smaller, whereas downwind, when we're going very fast, the apparent wind can actually swing very far forward. But when we slow down, and we do slow down significantly sometimes, then the apparent wind has a very wide angle to swing all the way back. So there's a wider range, which is why it's really important to be working the sail trim downwind to make sure that we're optimizing for every moment. And things are changing quickly, so there requires a lot of different changes. So don't forget about the jib, because that's sort of that extra 5%. You know, when we talk about what separates the top sailors from the ones just a bit back in the pack, it's the small details and focusing on things like jib trim, main trim, leech tension, and things like that downwind, and then adjusting as needed. All right, so I'm back again. Sorry about that. Last thing on jibing, and that's going to be it for me, is if we go back to our analytics and we look at a jibe, we'll notice that we have the same issue in the jibe as the tack, where we have a slowing coming out of the jibe. So if we look at the point of the jibe, there's actually the same thing like the tack, slowing from our maximum speed of 13.8 knots down to almost a knot slower by the time we're entering the tack, or sorry, the jibe. And what happens is we continue to further slow down to a bottom speed of 8.5 knots, and then after the jibe we start to rebuild speed. But it takes a significant amount of time for us to reach our maximum speed after the jibe. So same issues in the jibe as the tack as far as wanting to settle in quickly after and then get focused on re-accelerating as quickly as possible. So just a little visual representation there. And we'll notice if we look at our tack here, we can see that our maximum speed was 15 knots during this one snapshot. So when was that? It was probably sometime here before the jibe. If we look at the darker spots, average speed of 13 knots, just over, with our minimum at 8 knots. So that minimum would have been somewhere down here following the jibe there. And that's it for me. So thanks very much. If you guys have questions, let me know. Send me an email, shoot me a text, Messenger, WhatsApp, TikTok. No, just kidding. All right, bye.